Ah yes, the final level of a video game. The penultimate challenge that tests you on all your skills that you've gained throughout your adventure as you march towards your glorious final victory. Alright, so it's no secret that every Fire Emblem game has some questionable levels, but no game is perfect, so I usually don't mind this too much. However, I do find its track record with final levels in particular to be interesting to say the least. Ideally, a final level should challenge you to use the skills you've acquired throughout the game, provide a fair challenge, and be a satisfying end to your adventure. So now let's analyze how a lot of Fire Emblem finales fail to meet these standards. But before we begin, remember to like, subscribe, and comment if you end up enjoying the video. With all that out of the way, let's begin. First, I want to analyze the final level of New Mystery of the Emblem. Now, this level does test you on the main skill that you've been forced to learn throughout your journey, which is claiming victory as fast as possible. In many chapters, there are what I like to call doomsday timers, where if you fail to seize within a certain number of turns, Marth gets a free trip to the paddy wagon. In the bridge chapter, the invincible Harden will start moving towards you after a certain amount of time passes. In the Kadeen Desert map, Ashtram's hero squad will appear after you reach a certain turn, and so on and so forth. Throughout the game, you're beaten over the head with the idea of, hurry up, asshole! And this is no different in the endgame, where an infinite onslaught of dragons will appear after a while. However, I do not believe this level to be a fair challenge or a satisfying end. Why, you may ask? Well, in my previous examples, such as Ashtram appearing in the desert, you have a reasonable time frame of 10 turns before Ashtram appears. This is enough to put pressure on the player, but it's still reasonable for them to get all their errands done by then. Now you may ask, when do the reinforcements start an endgame? Turn 2? Alright, well the map's pretty small, so that's fair I guess. How many of them are there? That's right kids, finish this map by the end of the player phase of turn 2 or die to the Infinite Swarm. And I mean it, you will die to the Infinite Swarm. In my original playthrough, I tried to fight through to get to the final boss for countless hours before I gave up and just decided to cheese it. Here's the problem though, if you don't have the methods required to cheese it, you're pretty much softlocked. To even be able to defeat the final boss, you need to deal with these 4 clerics by recruiting them or killing them. And, since they're far away from the player, you can't possibly do that before the second enemy phase. You pretty much need the Warp, Rescue, or Again staves, with Warp not even being there on the higher difficulties. So, if for some reason you never got those items or you used them all already, well then it sucks to be you I guess. Now I know some pro LTCers in the comments are probably thinking, well just save those items for endgame, but that isn't obvious for the first time player. When analyzing these levels, I'm doing so from the perspective of somebody who hasn't calculated what Paul's average speed will be by chapter 19. So a new player might have spent hours playing this game, trying to get to the end, and have happened to use their gain and rescue staves along the way, and now they're doomed. There's also another potential soft lock in the form of Marth himself. When I first played New Mystery, I didn't pay attention to training Marth at all, since I played Shadow Dragon first and he's pretty bad in that game, and other units could definitely deal with the final boss in that game. Well, lo and behold, I got to the final boss, and even my units using the legendary weapons could hardly touch him, and Marth, who wasn't needed at any point in the game before this, had the only effective weapon. Needless to say, I spent the next several days of my life trying to rig several crits and dodges. Also, if we're counting the previous levels, since in Fire Emblem 3 they're all listed as endgame, there's another potential softlock. Since if you don't have Starlight, you can't win against Garnaf, who has the Falchion. Again, a common strategy now is to just coke up Katarina to deal with Medius, but somebody just trying the game won't know that. So, with all these factors combined, it's pretty safe to say that the final chapter is heinously unfair. It's not even satisfying when you win either, since even with a trained Marth that doesn't get one-rounded, you still have to rig a crit most of the time. This isn't very fun or interesting, since you're essentially just resetting the game until you get the right number. So at this point, I think it's safe to say that New Mystery's endgame is pretty trash because of its unfair difficulty and unsatisfying end. On the other hand, I feel like Binding Blade's endgame fails where New Mysteries succeeds, and succeeds where New Mysteries fails. Now technically these are 2 different chapters, but the actual endgame is pretty much just the final room of the chapter before it, and it only takes 1 turn to complete, so I'll just be counting chapter 24 as the first part of endgame. Throughout the game, the player learns that because of the overall shaky hit rates, that the weapon triangle is important, as it can allow usually inaccurate units like Gonzalez to take out a squad of enemies if he has the right advantage, and that movement options like the rescue command can be used to overcome portions of the map that would have been difficult otherwise. However, the endgame chapters only have one type of enemy, dragons, so as long as you have the legendary weapons you don't really need to consider what units you're using, and they're usually just long hallways and square rooms, so you don't really need to make any considerations in regard to movement options, so the gameplay is pretty dry. However, I would say that it does provide a fair challenge, since all of the legendary weapons are required for even unlocking this ending, so you'll be well equipped to handle the horde of dragons no matter what. And I would say that the ending is at least a little bit satisfying, since it's cool to see Roy, the lord that underperforms for a lot of players, one round the big demon dragon. So, Binding Blade's finale really is the inverse of New Mystery. It doesn't force you to use the skills you've picked up throughout the game like New Mystery does, but it's far more fair in its challenge, and it's a satisfying end to the adventure. Now that we've discussed final levels with at least some redeeming qualities, let's discuss what I consider to be one of the most abysmal chapters in all of Fire Emblem, the endgame of the Blue Lion's route. Applying the lessons you've learned throughout the game? Yeah, let me just use my diverse team of units that have excelled in their different classes. Haha. Sucks to be you if you don't have Battalion Wrath and Battalion Vantage Dimitri, and a Warper by the way. Fair challenge, how about massively inflated stats, ambush spawn siege tomes, and a pretty much infinite range final boss that can act twice in one turn that has 4 health bars? Does it at least have a satisfying ending? Well, to be honest, I'd rather replay the Revelation Snow map 10 times in a row, because even though it's boring, it doesn't make me want to destroy the universe. So I guess satisfying is one word for it. Jesus Christ, this map. I can't find one redeeming quality. Technically, you can immediately lower Edelgard's range by warping somebody into her throne room, but realistically the only unit with a high enough magic to do that will be Lysithea, so if you didn't recruit her in part 1 and haven't been consistently using her, then too bad. And if you try to get into her throne room the normal way, you can't bring any squishy units because Edelgard will just smite them out of existence, while you're also being pelted by turrets from both sides. Oh, and when you do finally get to her and start fighting her, she'll eventually gain Wrath and Vantage, a very fair combo for a final boss to have. You can trivialize some sections of the map using Battalion Wrath and Battalion Vantage with Dimitri, as mentioned earlier, but uh-oh, this guy refuses to learn anything for a large portion of the game, so if you didn't have this idea in mind from the beginning and weren't focusing on authority the whole time, then you might have a teensy little itty-bitty situation on your hand. Now, my friend who proofread this script said there are other strategies to consider, like using certain gambits like Sacred Shield. However, considering that they were never needed beforehand and I didn't even know about them until he told me, the game didn't exactly do a good job of sharing this information. Also, you can't even go back to the monastery before this chapter, so if you want to make any adjustments you'd have to replay the previous chapter to get back to this one. What fun! So now that I've discussed some terrible Fire Emblem final levels, let's go over a series that actually has some pretty good ones. I'll of course be talking about the one, the only, Mega Man is a pretty formulaic series, which comes with some benefits such as pretty consistent level design. The final stretch of the games usually includes some platforming challenges combining elements of challenges you've seen before, followed by a boss rush featuring all of the previous bosses, then a fight with the final boss. This meets all 3 of my criteria. The final level tests your previously acquired skills by throwing you against harder versions of familiar challenges, and of course, testing if you can defend Mr. Lincoln. The challenge is also fair since while you're going up against a gauntlet of enemies that you've already faced, you already know their patterns, so while it's tough fighting all of these guys back to back while maintaining your resources, you also already have the skills needed to beat them, and it all ends in a satisfying way since you've essentially beaten 10 bosses in a row with nothing but your own skill. Gee whiz, if only there was a Fire Emblem video game that included elements like a boss rush, like this one, using previously encountered characters. Oh gee whiz. Thracia has what I would actually consider to be a very good final level. Throughout the game you're put up against evil things such as status staves, dark magic with crippling effects, and of course the most evil thing of all, doors. These are also all challenges that the player must overcome in the final level. Now technically a soft lock is possible if you don't have any means to open the doors, but assuming the player somehow missed every optional character, you'd at least have Lara the Thief who can open doors. However, if Lara somehow died, you also get a warp staff from a character that joins at the start of chapter 23, 2 chapters before endgame, and seeing as 24 doesn't really warrant a warp staff use, the player should have at least one by endgame. All the dark mages have door keys, and capturing and taking door keys is a skill the player definitely learned in the Kempf chapter, so you can just warp a unit around to get some door keys, and you'll pretty much be good to go. So even if the player doesn't know to buy door keys beforehand, a soft lock is quite unlikely. So the game successfully combines many challenges you've faced in the past into one level in a fair way. As for a fair challenge, given all the resources the player likely has at this point, the player likely has all the resources they need to tackle the challenges this map presents. Now, finally, is it satisfying? I'd definitely say so. You need to defeat all of the Deadlords to be able to fight the final boss, coming in the forms of previous bosses or even allies if they didn't survive up to this point, similar to the Mega Man games. They're all different classes and have different weapons with various effects, so you need to use a good strategy to take all of them out efficiently, which is very satisfying once you find a strategy that finally works. It's also very satisfying to overcome the Deadlord for Evil, a unit the player saw destroy pretty much everything in the early game. It's also worth noting that Fire Emblem 7 has a similar endgame, and I think that one's pretty good too. Also, while the final boss isn't that hard, it feels nice to finally put down the man who turned your mother into a rock. So I think it's safe to say that Thracia has a very good final level, which proves that this series is capable of having those. However, this begs the question, why aren't there more of them? In conclusion, final levels are something this series has massively struggled with. I didn't mention all of them in this video, but trust me, there are definitely more stinkers out there. I don't really know why this is such a common problem, since Thracia demonstrates that IS is very capable of making a good finale, and I hope this is something they improve upon in the future, as the finale is the culmination of everything that's happened up to that point, and it really should be the best that the game has to offer. With all that being said, this has been 5 Points. Remember to subscribe and all that jazz if you enjoyed the video, and maybe check out some of my other scripted projects like the time I beat Shadow Dragon following the advice of the official Prima guidebook. Welp, see ya later, bye bye.